All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, folks, humans. Welcome to Reconcile. We're going to hop right in here. Just want to acknowledge that we're recording this podcast from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish peoples, Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh, which is through the Vancouver and Sea to Sky corridor, as we know it in those terms as well. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce my guest, Mr. Mike Mathers. And I'm going to hop in by just reading a brief bio that he's shared with me, and then we'll set the tone just to also seed a few things in this intro, what we will be talking about today in general, and then it'll be expanded upon will be topics such as psychotherapy, counseling, therapy, learning, and social emotional learning, psychedelics and psychedelic psychotherapy, and the rich topic of integration. When somebody's engaging in these topics, these experiences, how do they live what they may have experienced? How might it play a role in health, wellness, well-being, recovery, and transformation? And then exciting news as well that Mike has been working on a book for a little over 2 years, and we're going to open the space as well to give Mike an opportunity to talk about this curious book that he's working on. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mike, and then we'll get this ball rolling. All right, Mike Mathers, Master of Science, Master of Arts, registered clinical counselor. He's been a clinical counselor for over 15 years with experience in residential and outpatient treatment programs. He has served as the clinical director of a residential addiction treatment program, co-facilitated forensic groups for men convicted of sexual offenses, led PTSD treatment groups for veterans and first responders, and he has also run depression and anxiety treatment groups. Mike created Resilient Living Recovery, RLR, a virtual mindfulness-based group therapy program for treatment of mild to moderate substance use disorders, and he is currently in private practice. His practice is called Wellness Evolved Counseling, and he's a research therapist involved with clinical trials using psilocybin-assisted motivational enhancement therapy for alcohol, opioid, and amphetamine use disorders. He is also a MAPS, protocol-trained therapist. For those that don't know, MAPS is MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. So he's a MAPS protocol-trained therapist in the use of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, and he teaches online psychedelic-assisted therapy courses with Atma Journey Centers. Mike, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
anything you'd like to add there?
No, I just was getting a little emotional hearing it. It's words about my life and my work, and having lived these experiences the last 15 years. I don't always just recognize the totality of the journey that I've been on, and learning to show up and be of service to people. And sometimes in this instance, just hearing you read it, it was a reflection on kind of like the arc and the fullness of that, and the different opportunities that I've had, and how much these things have shaped me. And just taking that all in, like, I feel very humbled and grateful to have had these opportunities to be at this place, where we're having this conversation with all these exciting intersections of both challenges humanity faces and possible solutions to challenges. What a time to be alive, John.
Absolutely.
I probably say that a couple times a day, a couple times a week.
Totally. Well, you actually just inspired me to just share, to further contextualize our being together here, which is actually, it's nearly about coming up on 10 years ago when Mike and I met in the context of a training that I enrolled in existential analysis, where Mike was one of my trainers back then, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then speed forward a decade or 9.5 years, reconnecting in the context of Mike being one of my teachers again, training in psychedelic assisted therapy, and re-inspired this idea here with the podcast. We got some really rich things to talk about. And earlier in our conversation, Mike and I had a pre-podcast chat, but we sort of agreed on the idea. You let me know, but do you want to get the ball rolling by introducing us to what you've been working on in your book?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
And so that was really cool though, what you just said, to recognize, like, started as existential homies
Yeah.
and ended up with psychedelic love warrior bros.
Yes. Yeah.
More to be revealed on what any of that means. But
Uh-huh.
but like that's really cool to reflect on, right? Wow,
Yeah.
2014, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
What a trip. A lot has changed, and it's quite interesting just to have that reflection as well. So
Yes.
but that also then of course, like, full circle, and here we are again. What did you say? The continual ending and the did you
No, the unending unfolding of
say
life.
unending unfolding? Oh, like,
Yeah.
life is this recursive or iterative fractal of just things
Hmm.
that just keep emerging in different patterns, and
Hmm.
yet not being a circle, being a spiral, right?
Yes.
Like, here we are again at a different vantage point. Here I am
Yes.
again but at a different vantage point.
Mm.
So and that goes back, so that ties back to the book that I've been working on, which really I'd say started about 10 years ago.
Mm.
I've been working on writing this book for 2.5 years, but the genesis of it is at least 10 years old. And it started with, so I've had a little bit of a raw morning, as I told you. And
Mhm.
I'm noting that it's interesting right now. I need to preface that I'm probably going to get emotional and be, a little bit raw, because that's just how I roll. So I
Great.
just I have to, funny that I'm prefacing it.
Thank you
But
for being human.
yeah, well, thanks for receiving my humanness.
Hmm.
I'm just reflecting on the genesis of this book. It started from, really a me having a really poor relationship with myself. Let me back up. Title of the book is Curious AF. How do we feel about swearing here in this?
We feel great. Curious as
Yeah,
fuck.
okay. All right, cool, man. I'm from Nova Scotia, so I think that's my excuse for a four-letter word being sometimes the best feeling word there is. But
Well, yeah.
actually, so the title was Radical Curiosity for years, and this is
Ah.
my from this personal experience I'll share it back about in a minute. This is radical curiosity was how I started to work with people, just
Mhm.
being radically curious. And then there was radical acceptance. Tara Brach, that book really influenced me, and she
Mm.
wrote Radical Self-Compassion. And one of my mentors, Angeline Toth, wrote a book, Radical Trust. And then, like about a year ago, I was doing the Googling, and someone had put a book called Radical Curiosity. And I was like, darn it. Actually,
Mm.
that was about a year and a half ago. And then the title Curious AF came out, and that just fit for me.
Mhm.
So that's really, really what it is. And it's describing this particular brand of curiosity that I see not as about finding answers, um, but really about coming closer to ourselves and to our higher nature by hacking the background software, our evolutionary programming, and learning to come more into the present moment. Both hacking our, evolutionary programming, or dialing in or wiring into that, um, and both the programming that we have from childhood, which
Mm.
tends to pull our strings and run the show from behind the scenes.
Mm.
So curiosity is really an emotional regulation strategy, or an energy management tool, and a
Mm.
way of connecting with the more of the fullness of ourselves, as opposed to an answer finding or fact finding process.
Mm.
Uh, or outcome. I mean, it's a process rather than an outcome, and
Mhm.
um, and it's changed my life. And that's the beginning. It changed my life. One of my best friends used to be the story. I'm a fucking idiot.
Mm.
And that was probably 10 years ago when I first met you. I was doing that training. Don't know if I ever mentioned that. Speculate you wouldn't have guessed that that was such a good friend of mine, but it really was. And it was
Mm.
also a time, a very dark time. I was going through the end, the decision to leave my marriage with 3 young kids, and not knowing how I was going to do that, and just being really, really down on myself.
Mm.
After have gone through depression in my 20s, and just kind of not really coming out of that for in my 30s, and then all of a sudden, 10 years ago, I started waking up. And I really think I started waking up because of curiosity.
Mhm.
Whew. So the way that that worked is I was doing groups for men that had been convicted of sexual offending. Not something I thought I was going to get into out of school, but an opportunity that found me and work that I really came to enjoy, and learning to separate people from their behaviors was a real critical thing there. People would be like, why do you do that? That sounds terrible. And these people deserve to be, like locked up and throw away the key. But I some things aren't forgivable, but nobody is beyond redemption, is my belief. And both things can be true. And number one. Number two, it was an act of service to public safety and treating people who have offended sexually, which is often about depression, alcohol misuse, intimacy problems, childhood trauma, also
Yeah.
at its core, just like a lot of things. By giving them tools and life skills, psychological treatment, we enhance public safety. So it was really, really meaningful work for me. And I did that for about 7 or 8 years. And I worked with a psychologist. We were doing an acceptance and commitment therapy based treatment for men who had offended sexually. And the psychologist taught me you can't be both curious and judgmental at the same time.
Yeah.
It's one or the other, or condemn.
Right.
Can't be both. And like
Yeah.
this light bulb went on for me.
Yeah.
I've always been a curious motherfucker. That's really where this comes from. And like pursued multiple master's degrees, just this deep love of learning, probably drove my parents nuts, always asking why, that type of thing. But it really, like, at that moment in my life where I was really struggling with my relationship with myself, that really captured me. And so I started applying it. And what I started doing was, instead of trying not to think, or trying to challenge that thought, you're not a fucking idiot, people like you, like Stuart, this might be beyond your time or past, before your time, but Stuart Smalley on Saturday Night Live was this character. I think it was Dana Carvey. And he's like,
Yeah.
you're smart enough, you're handsome enough, and gosh darn it, people like you. And he'd do it. And it was like, sometimes like self-compassion practice feels like Stuart Smalley.
Yeah.
And I feel worse after. So I started saying, you know what? That makes me feel worse to try to like myself when I'm full of self-loathing. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to notice when I am engaged in self-loathing, and I'm going to get familiar with all my forms of self-loathing. How does it show up in terms of thought, feeling, sensation, memory, behavior?
Yeah.
And I'm going to develop a radar inside of me to get attuned to the pings of these inner experiences coming up. And when I notice one of those pings, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pat myself on the back. Victory of awareness, or VOA, I call it. Like, good job, you caught it. Your mind just called you a fucking idiot. That's the first thing you should do, is say, good job, you noticed it, you brought it into the light. Something happens in the back, in the dark, on autopilot. You caught it and brought it into conscious awareness. Great work,
What was the acronym you gave it?
Victory of awareness.
VOA. I love that.
Yeah, celebrated as a VOA, right?
Yeah.
So that became the first thing. Pat on the back for catching it, And then I would practice shifting from judgment to curiosity. So it's like, oh, you're a fucking idiot. Like I could, like, I was bringing in groceries one night, and I remember, and like the bag ripped. And I was like, my precious whole food goods go everywhere on the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, you fucking idiot.
Right.
And I was like, oh, wait, you just caught it, And I shifted from, oh, you fucking idiot, to, I wonder why my mind just told me I'm a fucking idiot. Now, notice the difference emotionally. Yeah, you fucking. I wonder why my mind just told me I'm a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Tension, softness.
Right.
Openness,
Yeah.
presence. Yeah. And just from that alone, and not doing it once, and as I say to my clients, if you practice And sorry, let me back up a step. The other
Mhm.
part was, so the I wonder why. And then sometimes people, this is what I do with people, and this is what I'm trying to do in the book, broaden my impact so I can have more people, know how to do this.
Mhm.
Because it really worked. It transformed my life. But it's like I wonder why my mind. Sometimes people don't know how to wonder.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I came across this really brilliant quote the other day, and I'd love to just share this right now and
Mhm.
not lose the thing. Most people do not see their beliefs. Instead, their beliefs tell them what they see.
Mhm.
This is the simple difference between clarity and confusion.
Mm. Can you repeat it actually one more
Most
time?
people do not see their beliefs.
Hmm.
Instead, their beliefs tell them what they see.
Wow. Yeah.
This is the simple difference between clarity and confusion. So,
Mhm.
that's a belief. I'm a fucking idiot. And it's also
Right.
by past experiences. And sorry, there's a little bit of construction going on here. Let me just close it. So yeah, that's a belief, and it's shaped by past experiences. And the other thing I'm trying to do in this book is recognize that that's adaptive. That was like, there is no part of us, there's no internal mechanism, there's nothing we do where we're trying to screw ourselves up. All
Mhm.
human behavior is purposive and adaptive.
Mhm.
So I noticed myself trying to get all my ideas out at once. So I'm just gonna pause and get curious. So
Yeah.
in the book, I talk about pausing,
Yeah.
PWS. I want people to build a pause button inside of them.
Mm.
There's a cute little image. My girlfriend, who I told you about, who does this art, Lydia
Yeah.
Love,
Yeah.
she's doing the illustrations. It's going to be a graphic novel. And so we have what's called pause points, PAWS, little
Mm.
pause.
Mhm.
And pause stands for point at what sucks.
Mm.
So I'm just going to pause right now. And I think I'm noticing the thought that, like, I'm not good enough.
Mm.
And so I'm trying to give you all my ideas at once to win you over so that will, and that's just really interesting to notice that, right? Um,
You've already won me over. You have.
well, then,
I'm.
John, but here's the thing with that, right? Like,
Yeah.
we want to recognize that other people are just mirrors, and
Uh-huh.
ultimately we only have one relationship in this life, and that's with ourselves. So
Uh-huh.
I'm actually not trying to win you over.
Yes.
I'm trying to obscure the fact that there's a part of me that hasn't won myself over yet.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
and there we are, right? Um, so just all interesting to notice that. And that then takes us to this. Again, I'm not going to try to do everything at once. So I'll come back to the idea of unconscious unworthiness, which is a really big thing that I've sort of started to see at the root of a lot of human behavior. But back to this, most people don't know how to wonder, and people need to taught how to wonder. So I wonder why my mind just called me a fucking idiot.
Mhm.
Where do you go with that, right? But like, for some people, it can be like, that's a dead end, and you have to kind of teach them how to wonder.
Yeah.
And so I want to, and how I work with my clients is train them to recognize that you're always going to be a mystery to yourself. You're a bottomless, you know
Mm.
you're a deep iceberg underneath the surface. Conscious awareness is the tip of the iceberg, and you're never
Mhm.
going to get to the bottom.
Mhm.
It'd be like going out into the ocean and looking down. No matter how bright light the light of curiosity is, it's not going to reach the bottom if it's like kilometers down. You're just not going to see the bottom. There's
Mhm.
no chance. Give up on the idea you're ever going to figure yourself out. And so let me
Mhm.
ask you this: you're never going to figure yourself out. You're always going to be a mystery to yourself.
Mhm.
How's that land for you?
Yeah. It I mean, I appreciate this in a mindfulness it's a meditative contemplation to feel into
Yeah,
the mystery,
yeah,
the direct experience of
yeah.
uh actually not knowing, not really being able to know, and like connecting with the unknownness
Now,
of your being.
now, you're a really clever guy, and you're really embodied in your intellect. I really appreciate it. I've learned so much from you just listening to that one podcast. Love it.
Mm.
Go into your heart and tell me how that makes you feel and what you
Hmm.
notice. That
Yeah.
that is there anything there? And it might just be barking up the wrong tree, but I'm
No,
just
that's great, but there's actually a lot there, and what it kind of feels like, it can be a little bit of a fine line, sort of like the tightrope analogy, like, you know, leans towards potentially fear, but also excitement and like wonder.
Thank
There's
you.
this teeter-tottering and
Brilliant.
like an experience of like
Yeah.
uh I don't know, quivering, like opening, closing. Like, is this safe? Is this okay to open to? I can like feel the ego, the body
Yeah.
ego, like wanting to maybe close, but it has this pulsing,
Brilliant.
much like the
Brilliant.
heart.
Brilliant. Love it. That's very, you're doing the work. You have a good relationship with yourself, knowing you're never going to figure yourself out. And I say that based on the identification of the fear that you just did,
Yeah.
right? That's just honest.
Mhm.
We were not in control of our as much in control of our inner experiences as we like to believe. There's just
Mhm.
so much wiring that's outside of conscious awareness. And there's a
Yeah.
part of us that really craves certainty, and lack of certainty has been life threatening to our ancestors.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I think, being the social animals that we are, when we don't think we've got ourselves dialed in or know who we are, it puts us at risk in terms of our social standing, and there's a big piece there, but I
Mhm.
won't get into that now. But I just like, thanks for acknowledging that. So a lot of people have a resistance to not knowing themselves, and essentially I want to, if you're listening to this, I want to invite you to consider that you're never going to really know yourself, and see what changes from that. Because
Mhm.
if you do that once, like, the formula is this: notice painful inner experiences, or pi can also stand for pleasant inner experiences, but they're not as well, they can be, sometimes they carry the weight, but it's more of the ones experiences we want to avoid, the painful inner experiences, thoughts, feelings, memories, and sensations.
Mhm.
And so notice those things when they come up, and practice getting curious and wondering, does this moment of distress have anything to do with unfelt experiences from my past? That's it.
Mhm.
That's it.
Mhm.
How does this have to do with ways that I've been hurt?
Mhm.
That's it. It's so simple. And simple, not easy. Do it once, it'll do nothing. Do it 100 times, like I did, you will transform your relationship with yourself. You'll fall backwards into self-acceptance, self-compassion, at
Mhm.
least more of the time, as a default, without the Stuart Smalley, I like myself and I'm a good person. That
Yeah.
will you will just bypass that. You'll bypass what in compassion circles they call backdraft, compassion backdraft, which is the idea love goes in, pain comes out. In compassion circles, it's considered a byproduct. I think it's actually a flaw of getting people to start at the finish line. Self compassion is the finish line. Self curiosity about our lack of self compassion and the roots of it and how
Mhm.
that's protective, that's the starting line. And
Love
that's
it.
what I
Yeah.
started doing. Did it 100 times. I don't remember the last time my mind told me you're a fucking idiot.
Mhm.
It's just, it's not,
Mhm.
it's not a, it's just still a, it's still an old friend I keep around, but it's like he just doesn't grab the wheel anymore in the
Yeah.
way that he used to.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about what you mentioned there around unfelt experiences? And
Yeah,
I want
great.
to add, so something you had actually mentioned yesterday was a little bit of a quote, but waking up from undigested
Yeah,
slumber, undigested pain, waking up from the slumber, kind of
yeah, yeah,
something about
great.
that.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really great place to go. So, I'll just say that, like, yeah, writing this book started with that simple thing that this transformed my life.
Hmm.
Noticing, thought I'm a fucking idiot, getting curious as fuck, doing it 100 times. All of a sudden, it's not there. And it sounds simple. It wasn't. It was over the course of years, right?
Yeah.
But like, again, do it once. That's like going to the gym. Do it once. People sometimes be like, "Oh, I got curious. It didn't work." It's like it's not supposed to work, like in the way that you think. It's
Yeah.
not to take pain away. It's to change your relationship with it. That's like
Ah,
going to the gym once and being like, "My muscles are sore, so working out's a bad idea."
ah,
No,
yeah.
no, it
Yeah.
doesn't. And so, that simple idea, and then ultimately, though, writing this book, I didn't know what it was going to be about. I didn't know what I was. I had a framework, but it's come through me, I think, and just emerged. And one of the things that emerged is this notion of, therapists were always like, "Oh, feel your feelings," right? And like, it's almost become a little bit of a meme. Luckily, I think there's just more acceptance. But then therapy speak becoming popularized as also there's a dark side of that too.
Mm.
Anyway, point is, therapists like to ask how you feel. Why? It's not about navel gazing. It's not like, look at me, emotional specificity or emotional granularity, the degree to which we can pull out nuance, label, name it to tame it, put a tag on it with a high degree of specificity, the better we get at doing it, the more behavioral, better our behavioral control.
Hmm.
You know, it's hardcore behavioral control. That's what feelings are about. They're a,
Hmm.
an approach and avoidance system. So,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
so I like to work with people by taking them to the feelings gym and doing
Hmm.
workouts. But it just started to come up, and that comes from like that work with men a lot, talking about the feelings muscle and all that started
Yeah.
to work. But then it started to morph more into this idea of feeling our feelings as emotional digestion. And
Hmm.
that just like idea, I haven't really heard anyone else talk about emotional processing as like digesting. Like, what does processing mean? What does processing mean? Like I process it. Okay, it's like gone, the pain's gone. No. But if I digest it,
Hmm.
it transmutes it. I can use it as nourishment
Yeah.
or fuel, right?
Hmm.
And it just, that metaphor became really rich for me for a number of reasons. Feelings are data, not directives, as Susan David says. I'll be quoting her a lot. Um, and She wrote a book called Emotional Agility. Highly recommend it.
Hmm.
Changed my life, that book. Um, she's an act therapist, and she takes acceptance and commitment therapy and makes it very digestible for the average person.
Hmm.
Um, but Yeah, so she says feelings are data, not directives, and it's our feelings contain information. They're signals, right? But we
Hmm.
need to learn to interpret and read the signals. So when we don't, and we live in an emotionally phobic culture that does not teach people to turn towards their inner pain and get the lesson from it. A lot of for hyper capitalism and having infected our culture, we teach people if you feel bad, there's something wrong with you, and there's a product for that, and it's your fault. Don't let anybody know, right?
Hmm.
And so that's interesting. Try not to go on too many tangents here, but that's kind of like, I think there's sort of an evolutionary reason. This thing called unconscious unworthiness.
Hmm.
Um, there's an evolutionary route to it, but then I think hypercapitalism has kind of dialed into that evolutionary route, and it manipulates it to its own end, and it's
Hmm.
making us all unwell to believe the lie that we're not good enough, right? And
Hmm.
it's really, really a
Hmm.
cultural, as Gabor Mate has talked about, a toxic culture.
Hmm.
But back to emotional digestion. So that's really, that idea, and then from that, in acceptance and commitment therapy, we talk about experiential avoidance, basically just avoiding things, inner
Hmm.
experiences. Like addiction is a form of experiential avoidance.
Hmm.
Sadness comes up. I don't even, it's like putting my hand on the stove, I pull it away.
Hmm.
Most people are just like, I don't even know why I drink. I just want to drink. It feels good, right? Well, why does pleasure feel good? Often pleasure is the abatement of pain.
Hmm.
Boredom can be painful, right? Um, so I'll talk about pain, but I'm talking about shame, anxiety, boredom, the thought that I'm not good enough, memories of times I've been hurt. Those are all painful inner experiences, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so we move away from things. There's good negatives and bad positives. We struggle when we move away from things we should move towards, when we avoid things we should move towards, and when we approach things we should move away from.
Hmm.
And I started to have this theory that is driven by our undigested emotions. So,
Hmm.
you know, we stuff happens, and we get hurt when we're little. We're ultimately, let me just pause there. I'm throwing a lot at you. And again, I'm like, part of me wants to bring up this iceberg diagram and take you scuba diving in the iceberg, but I don't really know. I
Hmm.
don't really think that's it. But I want to communicate a lot right now, because now we're going back into childhood, and how what happens. And this is so important and so big that I guess I just want to slow down and then,
Hmm.
see what's coming up for you before I go any further.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it might even be a potential segue. Maybe we bridge now. I mean, you already are bridging it. You are a bridge.
Yeah.
But the topic of your book, the themes in your book, the
Yeah.
the clinical experience, it's obviously very lively coming through you
Yeah.
here. I wonder if we make a bridge here to just the topic of therapy in general.
Right. Okay.
And
I think that helps a lot. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even like what that is.
Okay.
What's the role of therapy, therapist?
Okay, great, great.
Yeah,
Love it.
yeah, yeah.
Love it. Can you bring us back to that point that we just got to about childhood and the pain being too big and us being so small and the fact
Mm.
that we have a grief case? I'd like
A
to talk
grief, a
a
grief
grief,
case.
yeah, I'd like to talk about the grief case.
Yeah. Do you mean like take a note of that to bring us back there after?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just in case I don't think I'll forget, but I think that that's a wise like circle back to come back up to this. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just gonna take a breath.
Take a breath.
Love talking about this stuff, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. So, okay, what is therapy? Hmm. You know, um, again, that point that like humanity's in crisis, there's so many crises going on all of a sudden, I think it's I wonder if 2016 when they turned on the Large Hadron Collider, if it put us into another dimension, stuff that's beyond me, but
Yeah.
things went kind of squirrely in 2016, if you're asking me.
Hmm.
Uh, and life got really interesting personally for me.
Hmm.
That was a really dark year, but also like it was after that like I turned 40 and I felt like I was reborn and had the second chance of life.
Yeah.
Met a woman of my dreams, and we're 8 years in, and co-parenting these wonderful beings. And so it's like this crisis, and like seeing this crisis that we're in, and yet personally I've never been like more excited and hopeful, and it's quite a tension there.
Yes.
So now, and then we've got therapy coming into the sort of mainstream, where it's like
Hmm.
15 years ago, and it wasn't the way it is now. And it's kind of like also seems like there's so many like life coaches out there and therapists,
Hmm.
and like everybody's a healer, and like
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah.
Look at us go, right? Like
Yeah.
humanity is waking up and evolving.
Hmm.
And I think that's really exciting. And then there's also this sort of like maybe a loss there in terms of what's the core of it? What are we really doing? What does the work look like? It's not about, like what am I trying to articulate? I guess just like that mean culture idea, or like as people talk about like therapy terms being weaponized, or like everybody's a narcissist, and like
Yes.
people,
Yes.
that type of stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's this real interesting dance there, and then what is therapy? Well, um, what am I as a therapist? As a therapist, I see it that I've got a whip in one hand and a pom pom in the other,
Hmm.
you know? And what I've learned is um, often when people think they deserve the whip, they need the pom pom. And when they think they deserve the pom pom, I might need to bring out the whip.
Hmm.
Now, what the whip is also just like, doing this offender work with men who offended for years. There's a strong behavioral component to it. So I have some pretty hardcore behaviorist um, tendencies to me, giving people homework, talking about behavioral activation, goal setting, being very in one hand directive. And then there's this other side of me with motivational interviewing, existential therapy, where it's very soft and warm and person centered, and I kind of like I
Hmm.
have both of these components. And
Right.
so I think sometimes people go to therapy, and one thing that I hear from a lot of people when they come to me is like, okay, you know um, well, first of all, I don't think we do a very good job of training therapists. Like you and I, we've done this existential training program. It really turns you inside out,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And as it should.
Hmm.
You gotta the therapy will only go as far as the therapist has gone inside of themselves. So if you're working
Uh-huh.
with someone and they've got we've all got blind spots. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've got blind spots, but like if we're blind to our blind spots, or we're afraid, or we think going there makes us unworthy, and a
Hmm.
client's trying to go there, we're not gonna be able to take them there.
Yeah.
Number one. It's also a therapeutic relationship is a relationship where both parties need to be willing to be changed by it.
Mm.
And our traditional therapist training programs, the cognitive behaviorist, paradigm we're in based on the Western Biomedical Psychiatric Project, which I think has
Mhm.
actually done a lot of harm. Um, it's very much about therapists being in charge, following protocols,
Yeah.
seeing, diagnosing, and having interventions that are evidence based to meet diagnosis. Very reductive, loses the
Mm.
person. As an
Mhm.
existentialist, we're trained, by Alfred Langel. As soon as I think I've seen this before, I've lost sight of the person in front of me.
Yeah.
There is no relationship in that moment.
Yeah.
So it's a real
Mhm.
different approach to training. And so I think there's a few things going on there. And that will get to the unlearning part with psychedelic therapy, right? That,
Yes.
we're not in charge, the medicine is.
Mhm.
That can be hard when we're coming out of traditional therapy training paradigms.
Mhm.
So I think I'm trying to be very diplomatic saying this, but as a result of, there's so many programs training people to be therapists. I think there's a lot of work we need to do at improving our therapist training processes,
Mhm.
being more training the person of the therapist,
Mhm.
as opposed to training the therapist to be a tool of technical intervention. We are
Mhm.
our personhood is the tool. Who we are and matters more to how people change than what we do to them. How
Mhm.
they feel when they are with them, us, how seen they feel,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
how we are able to allow them to see us. Like it's a
Mhm.
human encounter where both people need to be changed, right? And that's not
Yeah.
how we train therapists.
Mhm.
Most their traditional therapy people can go and become a therapist without having done their own therapy. That is wild, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, most therapists do their own work, and most therapists are really caring and great people, doing good things in the world. I really believe that. I'm not trying
Mhm.
to pile on here, but I just
Mhm.
think there's a lot of room for improvement and things that I've heard, where people go to therapists and they're kind of like they didn't really give me tools. They listened and validated my experience and empathized and kind of just I just talked and it wasn't really directed and and there was nothing kind of pushing back. So sometimes people say that like
Mhm.
and I think what they're saying is like I didn't really feel seen
Mhm.
and and I couldn't really see them.
Mhm.
So I think it's this encounter and sometimes it's we're getting into the notion of also I think a lot of therapists are trained to think that being empathic and sure empathy's core like
Mhm.
empathy leads to change. In addiction treatment, this idea of like you need to be in recovery to be a good therapist. There's this old idea there that like a lot of people are only going to go to someone they want to know like are you an addict, right? That's one of my favorite questions on it. What do you mean by that, right? I'm a human, you are too. And
Mhm.
no one's an addict. Labels are for jars. You're having a human experience.
Mhm.
But they mean like, can I trust you, right? But
Uh-huh.
the idea that that therapists need to be in recovery to be effective is outdated. The thing that correlates most with change is therapist empathy. So yeah, empathy is important, but I think from that, um, a lot of therapists have just said, I need to have two pom poms in both
Mhm.
hands at all times, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it can get that sometimes is what people need, right? But I think it can only get people so far sometimes. And what they actually want is tools, um, and and uh, and sometimes you need the whip. And
Mhm.
what that means though is it's not about causing pain carelessly or callously,
Mhm.
you and from this distinction, I think we're getting into the idea of calling people in rather than calling them out. And
Yeah.
that's a big distinction I like. I'm not a fan of calling people out. Um, Usually that's just, I want to feel better about myself.
Mhm.
But calling people in, that's like, hey, I really want to feel close with you. And there's this behavior that's going on, and it's a barrier to this closeness. And I'm calling attention to this to see what you think and to see how this is for you.
Hmm.
And what can we do to get this barrier out of the way so that we can feel closer in this experience that we're currently having? And then
Hmm.
there's a bridge. So that's the here and now. And then there's a bridge to that, which is like, has anyone else ever told you this? Is this happening out there in your life? Right.
Hmm.
So like the micro to the macro. And
Yeah.
that's what calling people in is. And so therapy is that process of helping people reflect on their blind spots in a direct way that is always kind, not always, it doesn't always feel nice. And so it's different.
Uh-huh.
Being kind, and that kindness and niceness are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And yeah. And so I'll pause there.
Yeah. Well, actually, it might sound like a simple or fundamental question, but returning to sort of what you said there around therapy, essentially supports people in reflecting on their blind spots. Why do we need to do that? Why is that helpful?
Yeah.
If somebody
Yeah.
comes to
Great.
counseling,
Great.
like, what's so good about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Why
So
not just stay
okay.
blind, Mike?
Okay. So there's this. So this is just juicy, right? Now we're back to where we were from that, like what happens in childhood, right?
Briefcase?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so there's sometimes people come in therapy and they're like, I don't want to make a deal of the past. I don't want to blame my parents.
Yeah.
I'm here to like, let's just not do that, right? And I'm like,
No,
okay, cool.
no
Yeah, yeah.
childhood shit.
Okay, cool. That's your, and I'm making it sound like I'm like this draconian therapist, but I'm not. I meet people where they're at, and I say, like, as an MI therapist, a motivational interviewing inspired therapist,
Yeah.
that's my like technique intervention, but I'm an existentialist in my heart,
Mhm.
and I'm a human being overall.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like, okay, we can do that. Cool, let's go.
Mhm.
And I'm sort of like, I tell people, some people come into therapy and they're like, the mechanic model, drop my car off at the mechanics. I want to know the cost. I want to know what they're doing. I go get a
Mhm.
coffee, look under the hood, fix me, get me back on the road. And some people come to therapy like, fix me, get me back on the road.
Yes.
I'm a terrible mechanic, but good thing you're not a broken car. What I actually say is, we're getting in a vehicle. The vehicle is working. You're in the driver's seat, and I'm your navigator. And I've
Uh-huh.
got a GPS, it's tools interventions. We're going
Mhm.
on this journey. You get your hands on the wheel and you get to decide where we're going. You
Mhm.
get to decide what you want to talk about. I'm not going to tell you what to talk about, and then we go, and I'm the navigator. And I'm a guide, and I'm saying that path might lead to this path might lead that way. Which
Mhm.
way do you want to go, right?
Mhm.
And I think that path might be better for you based on what I know, but ultimately it's your choice. What do you want to do? The more empowered people are in their treatment, the better the outcomes.
Mhm.
So I just like have learned to get my agenda out of the way. I have no agenda for clients. I have an attitude of sacred neutrality, you
Mhm.
know, and that means, and this is from 15 years experience of over caring and thinking I needed to suffer the wounded healer, kind of like burning out, doing this like really intense work with first responders with treatment resistant PTSD, more or less. Well, just first responder experience.
Mhm.
They're all traumatized, right, in the service of keeping us safe. And I realized that, like, if I care too much or want it too much, I'm acting out of my own unworthiness. I want to help people so they feel better, so I feel better having been helpful. And
Mhm.
now it's like I take no responsibility for people's outcomes. I take 100% responsibility for my output and how I show up with them.
Mhm.
And what they do with it, I'm just totally neutral. But I also have this like sacred care and love for them.
Mhm.
And I have
Yeah.
this deep abiding belief that everybody deserves to have as much well-being, as much quality of life in terms of our feelings, our social relationships, and our sense of meaning and purpose for this brief time that we're on this planet. I want that
Mhm.
so much for
Mhm.
everybody, but I take no responsibility for how people live their lives in that regard. And so,
Yeah.
if people are not getting better, it's like, well, let's look at that, and I want this for you, but ultimately you're in charge. Therapy doesn't work from 1 hour of work. It's a touching point that lets you do the work in your life,
Mhm.
right? So that can be a bit of a process. But anyway, huge diversion there. Let's go back to where you were, uh,
Mhm.
where we were, which is like, why look at the past? So people come in and they're like, um, so yeah, with those people who are like, I don't want to make a big deal about the past, not here to do that. I mean, it can go in different ways. Sometimes they're looking for brief solution focused, and we do that work, and it's short term, and that's fine. They get their
Yeah.
goal. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
But more often than not, what's going on is their undigested pain is driving their maladaptive behaviors. And that undigested pain and these maladaptive behaviors, addiction, ruminative thinking that's at the root of depression, or catastrophic futurizing that's at the root of anxiety disorders, um, these are sorts of what lead to maladaptive behaviors. Um, these are strategies that worked at one time in our lives. They're adaptive to the context that they emerged in, right?
Right.
And so that's why the past is such a big deal. And so there'll come a point with those people, if they're saying, like, I know, and I don't want to make a big deal of the past, and then they're, maybe they're really trying to change their drinking, and they can, and they'll get to a point where this might be 6 sessions in, 10 sessions in, 3 sessions in, depending on the person, and how fast they want to go. Um, uh, where I'll just ask a Socratic question, like, I'm just curious, what do you think the impact of our past experiences on our current behavior? Is there any link? And just be very kind of like, like, is there like, do you think that doesn't matter at all, right? And you just can start exploring it that way. But so that's kind of just one way to work that. But my answer to that and why it does matter is we've always got one foot in the past and one foot in the present. So saying I just want to focus on the present, forget this stuff, it's like standing on one foot. We're out of balance, and you can do that, and you can stand on one foot. I prefer to have both feet on the ground personally. I'm much more stable, but it's not, if we're also only looking at the past, we're on one foot.
Yeah.
And so there's this balance that's needed between looking forward, looking back. I think about, like, do you want to drive your vehicle by going in reverse and looking in the rearview mirror? No, that would be ridiculous. That's like blaming the past. That's not the idea. Do you want to ignore the fact that you have a rear view mirror and 2 mirrors to check your blind spots? No, of course not. When do you want to check your blind spots, look in your mirrors? When you're changing lanes, when you're going to make a turn, when things look a little hectic. How does that metaphor translate into life? We're most at risk by being driven off course from what is unfelt from our past at times of high stress, change, challenge, emotional dysregulation. These types of moments. That's when we want to, like, check the blind spots. And that's why, in the book, I'm talking about this simple practice. Notice spikes in emotion, get curious about the impact of the past. Don't do it for 3 hours. Don't even do it for 30 minutes. There's a difference between stewing and brewing. Stewing, you're stewing something for 8-9 hours.
Yes.
Like in the case of bone broth, days, right?
Sure.
That's maybe like stewing.
Yeah.
Brewing, I made this coffee this morning, nice, delicious fuel that's got me really awake after my poor sleep last night. That was about 1.5 minutes. So I train people to be curious in these small doses, because stewing is like ruminating. Ruminating is not being curious. Ruminating is, and that's another thing people mistake curiosity for, is rumination. And the type of curiosity I'm trying to promote, it's 30 to 90 seconds, consistently repeated. And there's a delicate balance, because when we get close to our undigested pain, the tendency can be to fall in face first.
Yeah.
Another metaphor, is going face first into our pain versus face up. Curiosity's face up, rumination's face down. And so, so now back to this idea of the impact of the past and the grief case. So, let's see. Keep teasing that we're going to talk about this, but I'm feeling like, just, again, throwing a lot at you. How's your digestion? I know for listeners, there's a lot of information coming at you.
Yeah. Well, actually,
pause and see what's coming up.
Let's see how this goes. So, okay, the topic of undigested pain is what is sort of fueling maladaptive behaviors in people. Okay.
Yeah.
Just hold that for a moment.
Yeah.
People are starting, whatever stage of life they're in or current experience, they have the awareness that these maladaptive behaviors I recognize are not working for me. I'm suffering.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best to try to live and be myself. And maybe I feel like I can't be me, or I'm so overwhelmed. I
Right.
I'm going for this, you know, substance or this behavior, or I'm chronically ruminating, and that's just wallowing. And maybe this interesting piece here around learning. So people have this within that is sort of a learned helplessness. This is
Yeah.
just how it is. I'm
Exactly.
in this kind of rut.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
things that are popping up as you talk here make
Yeah.
me think of the learning or corrective learning experiences that maybe move somebody from disempowerment, um, living from trauma, this kind of thing, to and learned helplessness to learned effectiveness.
Mm,
And what I'm curious about
yeah.
is, someone could read a book and have revelations and insights, but here we are, both therapists talking. It's like, what is it that really supports this the change?
Yeah.
And so I think we're like leaning into these edges around maybe we need to digest the past.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
That's part of it. Yeah. That's a great jump in. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Um, so I'm finally ready to talk about unconscious unworthiness and the
Hmm.
evolutionary roots and the roots
Hmm.
in our childhood and the what's going on there.
Yeah.
But in terms of what you just said and what supports change, I was listening to this podcast, the Trip Report. I can't remember the guy's name, but great podcast
Hmm.
about psychedelics. And he had this behavioral health researcher on. It was talking. I'm really big in my with my practice, wellness evolved counseling. I don't do addiction treatment. I do quality of life enhancement. So here's problematic substance use. Here's our quality of life, our well-being in three areas: emotional regulation, social connection, meaning, and purpose.
Hmm.
Kind of based on the four FMs and some work that I've done. This is insider information, doesn't really matter, but point from our existential training.
Yeah.
But you know, our feelings, our relationships, the relationships with self, relationship with others.
Yeah.
That's both thing, and then meaning and purpose in life. These are considered the fundamental motivations of the human being, and
Hmm.
and I see this as our foundational for our quality of life. So quality of life enhancement means pushing up on those areas rather than pushing down on substance use. But if we push up on quality of life, the urge to engage in problematic substance use just starts to go down. So that's what I mean by quality of life enhancement. And
That's what you've noticed, even in your own clinical work. You've
that's what I've
noticed.
noticed in doing these
Ah.
addiction groups. I started to see and see that these were the primary areas where people fall
Hmm.
into substance use: emotional regulation problems, social connection, meaning and purpose. And one way we could see it is, the saying is, drugs and alcohol are not the problem; they're the solution. And what are they a solution to? Undigested pain, the cascading impact that has on how we show up and with others and ourselves, and the cascading impact this has on an ability to live a meaningful life.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
I just see that thread. I think it's very simple. Not easy. Again, we're complicated creatures, but these simple ideas have really guided me. So just to try to keep that on point.
Yeah.
Love the fact that this is going to be a 5-hour conversation. By the way, we'll get to integration. I think we
Yeah.
already are. Two really great questions of psychedelic integration. One feminine, one masculine, that I've learned from two great
Yeah.
mentors of mine and mentors, colleagues. One is, okay, you've had this big experience. Now just notice what's different in your
Uh-huh.
life. Right? That's integration. The work's done. What shifts? Paying
Mhm.
attention now is the work. Right?
Yes.
And it's not really work. It's just a different way of noticing yourself, and what's different. But then this other more masculine perspective is like, what are you going to do about it? You got this insight, you got this wisdom. What are you going to do about it? How are you going
Yeah.
to integrate? How are you going to embody it? Right.
Yeah.
And I like both of those elements. Right.
Hmm.
But anyway, this podcast Trip Report, this behavioral, he was talking about like, behavioral health changes, like these big things that lead to huge crises in public health: smoking, drinking, diet, and exercise, right? The big four,
Yeah.
and so looking at what helps people change in those areas and the possibility of psychedelics to help around that, like the promise is huge, just
Hmm.
from a like public health standpoint, savings, cost effectiveness.
Hmm.
There's such a drain on our system as a result of the big four and challenges in that.
Hmm.
Everybody knows what to do. It's not about knowing better, you know knowing better is not enough for doing better. And that'll get back to unconscious unworthiness in a second. But just to finish off this point about learned helplessness, agency, and all that, um, and why that's so big, listening to this behavioral health researcher, he was talking about psychological mechanisms that support change. And two psychological mechanisms. One was the belief in my agency or my autonomy or my ability to impact, to have success. That, as someone who practices motivational interviewing, like the motto is, we learn what we believe when we hear ourselves say the words. So I just have to have a conversation where people, I'm not persuading people to change. I'm having a conversation where they're persuading me of the need to change. Works much better that way. Then it's not an argument, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got a counter will. If I say, someone tells me go right, I want to go left. This is how I got my kids to eat broccoli. I bet you can't eat that tree in one bite. I bet you can't do it. It worked until they were about 6, and it was soy sauce that worked. But like they showed me, they proved to me. I'll show you, Dad. And that's called the counter will. Gordon Neufeld calls it the counter will. And so knowing better is not enough for doing better, and telling people what to do isn't, but supporting people's sense of agency in them being able to direct their own change, their confidence in their abilities, hugely correlated with the ability to actually change, right?
Yeah.
What can psychedelics do for that, right? A lot, right? I think. And then the other psychological mechanism he talked about was perceived barriers. So the more we think things are in our way, I can't do it, I'm not that type of person, I don't have support from my network, this isn't, like that also is hugely facilitative of successful change or not, right? So that's what just came up for me when you were talking about agency and autonomy. And then to go back to now what going into the sort of the swamp, let's say that. And I think the swamp is actually a beautiful place. There's a lot of lush vegetation in there. And yeah, there is, right? We're talking, I think, about the unconscious too. And the unconscious is so powerful, the subconscious and the unconscious. What we're aware of is a fraction or a sliver of what's actually going on, in our minds. And that's just a huge thing to, I'll start with people like, everyone's at a different place in terms of their capacity for being psychologically minded. And I really try to, meet people where they're at, which doesn't mean, like not using like hitting people over the head with fancy therapy speak, but just being like plain. And in this book, I'm trying to write this book for the average person. I think there's a lot of good self-help stuff out there, but sometimes it can be very technical or overly complicated, and I want to really simplify things because I want people to understand this. And so one thing I'll talk about with people when we're not, it seems to be tough for them to be curious about what's going on in their in the background for them is, do you think you can be aware? What's it like? What happens for you when I say, you can have thoughts you're not aware you're thinking? Right? And they're like, does that compute or not? Most people it does, right? They can talk about it. But what about you could be having memories you're not aware that you're recalling? Like, how does that compute, right? And that's like a really important thing to understand, this phenomena of implicit memory. We can be having past oriented experiences, recalling something from the past, but not aware that we are. It's like triggered by something in the moment, a smell, a sight, a sound, or somebody's behavior. And we have feelings come up and we project those feelings onto the present, but it's actually a reminder of stuff that's undigested from the past. And in order to protect us from that, it's in the grief case, we don't want to open it up. We project that onto the present moment, and all hell breaks loose, right? In very varying degrees. So that's kind of what we're talking about with the grief case, but there's a little bit more to it. But that, like, you can be having thoughts you're not aware you're thinking. It's like, I'll say, it's like a radio DJ is on the air, and you turn the volume down. Does the radio DJ go home? Station's off the air? No, you just turn the volume down. Same with our thoughts, automatic thinking. We have 80,000 thoughts a day on average. We're only paying attention to 49% of the time. Love that
Mm.
research, by the way. That is a stat. It's like 50,
Mhm.
it's basically 50%, but they had to say 49. That's
Oh
what they
yeah.
like. Hilarious. But so half the time we're not paying attention to what we're thinking. And a
Mm.
good proportion of those thoughts are negative thoughts or predictions about self-world and other
Mhm.
that are just so like the story, I'm a fucking idiot, or I'm lazy and people are going to see that I'm, good for nothing, or, all of these things that people will tell themselves.
Mhm.
And this is often happening in the dark, with the volume turned down, with no awareness that we're often having implicit memories come up.
Mhm.
Inside, have you seen Inside Out too?
No, not yet. Saw the first one.
Oh,
Yeah.
how could they make a better movie than the first one? And they did. And
Yeah.
wow, man. And so you're gonna love it. And it really gets in there with this stuff, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I won't give you any spoilers there, but how I like to think about it with the grief case and all this, um, and then I'm gonna put something on the bulletin board and then go back to the unconscious unworthiness, evolutionary roots, and catch back up. But
Yeah.
what I want to pull on the bulletin board is stuff happens. We're co-regulating beings, meaning we have these nervous systems, these brains that are undercooked when we're born. If brain development happened, the human being, the brain is a fascinating marvel, and very, very complicated. And if that brain development happened, a horse is born and it's running within 5 minutes. A human being is born and it takes us, a year before we're able to walk.
Mhm.
And the reason why is because so much of our brain development happens post birth,
Mm.
and that's just so that the species could survive. If these brains were born fully cooked, we more women would die in childbirth than would have been necessary to perpetuate the species. So nature, being
Mm.
as clever as it is, has this great workaround. Now the part about that is that makes us very vulnerable to the experiences. Our brains very vulnerable to being shaped to the experiences and the quality of care we receive early on in our life.
Yes.
And so,
Mhm.
and that gets into the notion of like personality as more a form of scar tissue. People
Mm.
later on are saying, this is who I am, or this is how I am. And they have all these beliefs about themselves. And it's like, no, that's just a reflection of what happened to you and how you protected yourself. It's not who
Mhm.
you are.
Mm.
It's what happened. And so the idea there is with these as our nervous systems are wiring, our caregivers are giants in our lives. They can do no
Mhm.
wrong, and in our minds early on. And of course children think if bad things are happening to them, they must be bad. That's just the just world hypothesis. And also it's more painful to think, I've been hurt by a caregiver, or they can't meet my needs because they're a flawed human being, than it is to think I must not deserve to have my needs met.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
that forms, this is just, as far as I'm concerned, no one gets out of childhood unscathed. Not in this toxic culture.
Mm. Mhm.
If we were living it is hard being a parent in this capitalist system. And we don't support families and development. It's not about blaming parents, it's blaming the system. We
Mm.
haven't created, as Gabor Mate again says, we have not created a system that is designed to meet the fundamental needs of the human being. And a
Mm.
lot of what we call individual pathologies are actually cultural pathology.
Yes.
So anyway,
Mhm.
stuff happens in childhood. There can be stuff that shouldn't happen, that does, abuse, trauma, neglect. Then there's stuff that should happen that doesn't, and that can be traumatizing as well. An attuned
Yes.
caregiver that validates or witnesses me or sees when I'm in pain and shows up, says it's not your fault. I got you. What do you need? Right. And it's we're resilient little beings as well. So there's room for that. Um, but essentially what happens is we get hurt, the pain's too big, we're too small. As a result, we can't fully feel the pain and we
Mhm.
sort of split off from it.
Mhm.
And, I think neurobiologically what happens is, there's these two forms of memory, episodic and emotional. And this is a very crude way of looking at it, at least my understanding, is the memory, if the pain's too big, the emotional charge of it gets split off and essentially doesn't get integrated with the episodic memory. They get
Mm.
stored in different places
Mhm.
and as a form of self-protection. And that's what I mean by things getting stored in the grief case.
Yeah.
The remainder, like there's experience that happens, it's this big, the pain's this big, my capacity is this much. So
Yeah.
this much gets shoved into the grief case.
Ah.
Yeah.
And which just remind us, what was the episodic memory and the other one was what?
The emotional memory.
And that gets stored in the grief case, that one?
Yeah, the remainder of the emotional
Yeah.
memory, the charge that is too big for us to process at the time.
Yeah.
And now we're hinting at why psychedelics are so powerful.
Getting there.
You're-
Does that get stored in the implicit memory then, like embodied memory in a way,
Well,
or like
I mean, again,
unconscious?
I'm speaking above my pay grade here, but I think that's one way of looking at it. I see it as like it kind of
Mhm.
free floats in the nervous system.
Yeah.
That's my way of thinking of it.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a raw nerve close to the surface. Depending on how
Mm.
deep the pain was, how long ago it was, that correlates with how little we were. The ages of 5 and 13 are really big formative times because of the brain development that happens at those times. It's not
Yeah.
hormones in teenage, it's brain structure changes, right? As
Mm.
Dan Siegel points out, the brainstorm idea, which is there's huge changes in structure. So stuff at 5 and 13, we're very like susceptible to those at those times.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But in my idea,
Mm.
to keep the grief case closed, we form what's called secret agreements. So, and now we're getting into what's called this phenomenon of unconscious unworthiness. So a
Mm.
secret agreement is, I got hurt, the pain was too big, I decided it must be my fault, right? And in order to kind of keep that stuff in the grief case, I make an ironclad hidden belief
Mm.
about who I am as a person,
Mm.
right? And that keeps that emotional charge kind of tucked away, but feelings buried in the backyard don't stay buried. They turn into emotional zombies sometimes years later.
Mhm.
That's what addiction, trauma, depression, and all this stuff is. It's emotional zombies showing up at our door
Mm.
that link back to these undigested experiences from early on. And, the secret agreement and what I really want people to see is the things, these personalities, scar tissue, these negative beliefs, they're not even a flaw. They're a form of self-protection. And the idea is, like the I'm a fucking idiot, whatever that comes from.
Mhm.
Isn't about blaming my parents. For me, my story is I was the baby of the family. And so a lot of times I just felt lesser than people. Like I couldn't be heard. Everyone's smarter than me. They're in on the joke, or I'm trying to make my needs met and I can't. And like it had a big impact on me in a subtle way,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
necessarily in childhood because so many of my needs were met, but later on there was a big impact because of how unresolved that was for me and how unaware I was of these
Mm.
dynamics shaping me.
Mhm.
We might not fully get there today, but that's kind of what led to the in the dark times, this me recognizing I have a trigger for feeling misunderstood, misheard,
Mm. Mhm.
and it was driving my life off course, and curiosity helped me get it back.
Mhm.
But these secret agreements. So okay, I'll give you the example there.
Yeah.
My secret agreement and what I learned, was that John, I'm really sorry. Quick, just time check. How far are we in right now? So
We're
I
an
could.
hour in.
We're an hour in.
We're an hour and 8-ish minutes in.
We can go another 20 minutes.
Is that good for you?
I could keep going longer if the episode is, but I think
20, 30 minutes?
20, 30 minutes. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
It was just helping me shape how personally revealing I wanted to be here. I was in 2000, right after I first met you, 2016, made the decision I was going to co-parent from a different house. I find myself in 2016 in a one-bedroom apartment with these 3 beautiful children, lying flat on my back
Mhm.
and looking up and praying
Mhm.
because I didn't know what to do. I knew I was screwed one day at the playground. We're there and I'm like, okay, guys, time to go. And all 3 of them ran in different directions, John.
Mhm.
And I was just like, what the fuck do I do now?
Mhm.
Yeah, so there was a lot of times where I just felt like, what do I do? And there was a lot of anger. And I started to realize like I could be fine. Like I could call their names like 4 times, like come to the table, guys, cut it out. It's time to come to the table. I've got dinner ready, like I'm inside still doing things. And then like the 5th time, I would just lose my shit.
Mm-hmm.
And those were some of the worst experiences that me and my children had. Now, the really beautiful thing about that is it also is the experience that led me home to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realized from that, this deep wound of not feeling heard
Mm-hmm.
that had flown under the radar, and just how deep it was. And I started to get curious in those moments. Okay, so here's how it worked. It wasn't just the I'm a fucking idiot story that started, but then it was the I'm
Yeah.
a fucking idiot curiosity practice helped prepare me for this, which was
Mm.
my biggest challenge, was in those moments being like, um, okay, so here's what happened. I started to like think, okay, I'm losing my shit. It's really bad for them. It's really like everyone's like, crying after this. And then I feel shame. And this is how I'm behaving. So like, what the heck's going on here?
Yeah.
You know? And I started to think, does this have anything to do with my childhood? And then I started, trying to connect the dots in the moment. I was like, what if I started getting curious about whether I'm having an experience from the past in those moments where I'm losing my shit? So you know what happened?
Tell
I
me.
was, I was still losing my shit. I just love saying it like that because it's like, you know what? Change is very slow. And it wasn't about like catching it in the moment.
Yeah.
That's just not where we start.
Mm.
From dysregulation to like perfect regulate. That's not how this works.
Mm.
How this works is here's me being the volcano dad. Here's the me coming back into wise mind.
Mm.
And, or presence, or, um, Dan Siegel talks about it like the high road and the low road. So like brain stem, limbic system, running emotions running the show. That's the low road. High road,
Mm-hmm.
Prefrontal cortex,
Right.
mind controlling it. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is like low road moment, volcano dad. This is, high road, um, integrated, wise, present dad.
Got it.
Um, and what started happening is I'd become curious here after the blowups. The blowups were still happening, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd start to become curious here. And what started to happen? My recovery time started to speed up. I shortened the gap.
Yes.
And then I just remember one day noticing the urge to lose my shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see it, and I could recognize that them not hearing me was a reflection, I think, of the fact that a lot of times in my life I didn't feel heard. And
Mm.
it just was like this moment of like, wow, this works. And then just building on that. So I just want to be very clear. And as I am with
Yeah.
my clients, this isn't about perfection or catching. Knowing better is not enough for doing better.
Mm-hmm.
And my secret agreement, I realized, and this isn't something I've ever heard my mind say, but through deductive inference,
Mm.
educated guesses,
Yeah.
gathering data in those moments when my emotions spike, looking at my behavior, getting curious about the past, checking rearview mirrors, I started to realize that I think I've got this secret agreement. If I'm not heard, and it goes like this: if I'm not heard, seen, appreciated, valued, understood by the people that matter the most, they're gonna abandon me, and I'm gonna be alone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I call unconscious unworthiness. And essentially, what I've seen is everyone's running from a different version of the same story, and the
Sure.
story goes like this: there's something wrong with me, and if anyone finds out, I'm going to be rejected. And that's what a secret agreement is. And I encourage people with curiosity to try to uncover
Mm-hmm.
these secret agreements. And this now.
I have a follow-up. I have to jump in there for a second. It's really rich. So even just the example, if somebody finds out about who I really am, I'm going to be rejected or abandoned. But what my check-in is, I imagine they form a way to deal with that. Is that what the agreement is? So I'm not gonna do this, or this is how I'm gonna be.
Exactly. Exactly. And
I'm gonna be
it's subconscious at best. And like
sure.
large part of it that's fully unconscious because the memory centers weren't formed enough for memory to be integrated at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes me think of it, just to make it a more lively example or bring some life to it, would be like somebody forms that unconscious agreement, that secret agreement or a commitment. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
committed to this part,
Yeah.
becomes solidified and
Yeah.
fixated. I am
Yeah.
never going to show myself ever again. Or
Exactly.
I'm not gonna speak my truth. I'm not gonna express myself authentically, because if I do, then I'm going to be rejected, abandoned, and that's so bloody painful. There's no way I'm going there ever again. So
Exactly.
this is who I am now. I'm
Exactly.
staking my secret agreement commitment flag in the ground as
Yeah.
it shows up through my personality, my beliefs, my assumptions, my expectations around
Exactly.
people, what
Exactly.
they're going to be. And
It's
we're
a
going to,
lens. It becomes
yeah,
the lens we see
I
self
see.
growth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well said. What do you make of all that?
What do I think of that? So I wonder actually if we could segue towards potentially the bridge that has been created between psychedelic plant medicines and therapists. So
Great.
to offer
Great.
that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
maybe in summarize a little bit is what I'm hearing from elements of your stoke on what you've been integrating through clinical practice and writing your book and lived experience is there's a theme here around like learning and unlearning that seems
Yeah.
to be showing up for me as if I like name that, bringing the unconscious into conscious awareness.
Correct.
And by doing that, through that process of getting your reps in at the gym, so to speak,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
in personal practice, but perhaps having a therapist to mirror to you how to be, how to have wonder and curiosity and openness to explore. And like, well, what is that like for you to
Yeah.
have those questions asked to them? It seems to be open up a space for the possibility of a different way,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Right.
a corrective experience.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is proves the opposite of the secret agreement.
Yeah. Oh, maybe that agreement doesn't need to be so held anymore. Maybe I don't need
Yeah.
to, maybe I
And
don't agree with that anymore.
that can't be like we can't think our way out of trauma, you know? Is it okay if
Mm,
I jump in there?
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like, yeah, that was great. Great. You know, that has to be the violation of the acceptance, the permission to violate the secret agreement. It has to be embodied. It has to
Uh-huh.
be, it can't be. And that's where psychedelics come in, right? They're, you know, the amygdala tamer. That
Mm,
amygdala is in the way. The amygdala,
mm.
I think, is really like in charge of the secret agreements. I'm just making that up. I don't know neurobiologically if that's true, but I'm going to pretend it is. Um, you
Well, hold
know,
on, for folks that may have never heard of any of that jargon before, amygdala in
right.
the middle of the
Thank you.
brain from a
Almond shaped center, fear processing place of the
yeah,
brain, right?
got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And fight or flight, responsible sort of for fight or
Hmm.
flight, is my
Hmm.
understanding as well. And you know, our reactions.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much richness there, John, and just what you just summarized. So I'm just really trying to capture that, and I think it's like 2 to 3 more minutes, and then bridge to psychedelics because it really worked. But
Yeah.
just to kind of wrap up this and to bridge at the same time. So, and what you were just talking about is this. Here's how the unlearning works. We need to collect disconfirming experiences,
Mm.
right? We need to run behavioral experiments and test the secret agreement and get a different experience and integrate that felt sense in the nervous system. And it's not like top down or bottom up. It's not like thinking our way to a better life or changing your thoughts and your life will change. It's also not
Yeah.
just being a jelly somatic, you know, blob that's just moving through the world without cognition directing things. It's top
Mm.
down and bottom up, not top down or bottom up. And
Hmm.
it needs to be both. But you know, I think it's like really like that's that disconfirming experience is the unlearning, and the more we can collect, you know, these things like just start to lose their grip on us, and we
Mm.
start to go from we do this by making the implicit explicit, or making what is
Mm.
unconscious or subconscious more conscious.
Hmm.
Curiosity is essentially through the writing of this book, I've realized it's like, you know, we've all got a story of unworthiness written on our hearts. Most people don't know how they feel about themselves. I want to encourage you and you, the listeners, to recognize you don't know how you feel about yourself at a deep core level. And that's okay. And there's a story written in invisible ink on your heart. And curiosity is like that spyglass that helps us read the invisible ink.
Ah, cool.
And so,
Hmm.
it's also not about, so this unconscious unworthiness, very quickly. It's not about like moving from, okay, I don't know how I feel about myself. Okay, I know I have this secret agreement that I don't feel I'm worth being heard, to like, now I'm totally worth being heard. That was like the volcano dad strategy. Like, I'm totally worth being heard. Doesn't work. I had to
Hmm.
start with moving from unconsciously unworthy to consciously unworthy. And this is a step people want to skip.
Ah.
This is the victory of awareness. This is the, I just caught my mind telling me I'm a fucking piece of shit, And it's like, I still have that experience, but it becomes real, not a real, not true story.
Hmm.
So that's conscious unworthiness. And when you do that and use, and then switch to curiosity in those moments and you do it 100 times, through that process, I tell people do curiosity work for 3 months and don't expect to see any benefits. I believe in 6 to 8 weeks of consistent practice, just like the gym. You're not going to see benefits for 6 to 8 weeks.
Uh-huh.
If you commit to 3 months, you're more likely to get where you want to be.
Yeah.
Same with this. But in that process of showing up to ourselves, being consciously unworthy with curiosity as the lens, we start to move into unconscious worthiness.
Hmm.
And then in
Hmm.
therapy and self-reflective practice and seeing, wow, I'm different. Or a year ago, as I like to do with clients, like a year ago, you would have been, hey, something shitty happens. And it's like a year ago, you would have reacted
Hmm.
totally different to this. Right. And that's like, you want to celebrate when things suck less, because those are often markers of our change. And if we stop and observe and witness ourselves in those moments, we go
Hmm.
from then unconscious worthiness to conscious worthiness.
Hmm.
And that's what we're doing is trying to shrink the space unconsciousness unworthiness lives and promote the space of conscious worthiness. But it's not a like all or nothing thing where we completely leave it behind. It's
Hmm.
just the nature of our the neurobiological substrate that we are. It doesn't work that way. There's
Hmm.
always going to be autopilot. You're never going to be perfectly aware and awake. It's more about just doing it more of the time. So
This,
very,
well, that
yeah.
makes me think of something Brene Brown said, which was just in her infamous talk, the one on vulnerability, shame, courage, was we are wired, humans are wired, children are wired for struggle, but
Mm,
they're worthy of love and belonging.
love it.
I
Love
really
it.
appreciated that simple little
Yeah.
punchline.
Yeah. I like your quote, shame withers in the light.
Hmm.
And that means
Hmm.
it grows in the dark. Right. And so
Hmm.
again, like I see curiosity as this just lantern or light to help,
Hmm.
bring our shame into the light from this
Hmm.
perspective, which we can digest it without
Yeah.
inspiring the compassion backdraft. Um, but very, very quickly, and then bridging back to psychedelics,
Yeah.
people are like, why am I so hard on myself? I've talked to so many people in my experiences. Most people are very hard on themselves.
Hmm.
It's like, what's going on there?
Yeah.
You know? And here's what's going on. Something adaptive for the human species. What's good for the gander is not always good for the goose. And
Hmm.
this is really important in terms of our understanding of our evolutionary history and how we got here,
Hmm.
right? We've got Stone Age brains operating in a modern environment, and we are cooperators. Our best thing about us is we evolved in tribe. We're not the strongest with the sharpest teeth and claws. We're the
Yeah.
ones that banded together and
Hmm.
work together and use these big beefy prefrontal cortexes
Hmm.
to come up with tools and weapons and cook our food and to have social hierarchies and structure where we cooperate and take care of each other.
Yeah.
That's what we are as human beings.
Hmm.
And again, this toxic hyper-capitalist system that we've created has convinced people that we're something different, and it's just a
Hmm.
lie. It's a lie. And so, it's been adaptive to these 50,000 years ago to have a small group of humans where more of them felt like they were pieces of shit more of the time. If you
Hmm.
had a tribe where everyone's like, I'm God's gift to the tribe, I can do no wrong, that wasn't going to work. People are going to tromp all over each other.
Hmm.
But you have a tribe where 95% of them, there are, like, I do say the born psychopaths, I probably would say are the one distinction, but that's like a fraction of 1% of humanity, I think. And
Hmm.
um, even narcissists are really, the narcissistic wound is a wound of unconscious unworthiness. But it's been adaptive in our background, in our history, for more of us to be worried about what others are thinking of us. And the reason why is, because if you got kicked out of the tribe in evolutionary times, it was a death sentence.
Hmm.
You know? the pack survives, the lone wolf dies. And dying of embarrassment is the phrase. You're not going to die of embarrassment, but there's this deep wiring that to be judged or rejected is a threat to our survival, because 50,000 years ago it was, if we got kicked out of the tribe. And so people just need to understand that we got this wiring, you know, and then and that's been adaptive. Our shame is a shield, it's a cloak, it protected us early on. It's not something to be demonized.
Yeah.
These maladaptive behaviors, the ways you abandoned yourself, are the ways you protected yourself. And if we're going to change that and get the confirming experiences, first we need to show up with reverence and honor the maladaptive strategies, because they weren't maladaptive at the time, they were perfectly adapted to the context. I've yet to meet anyone who's struggling that their story doesn't make perfect sense about how this current struggle was at one time the thing that almost saved their life, if not emotionally.
Yes.
You know? Yeah. So I think that's enough there on, I just kind of was trying to get that piece out about unconscious unworthiness and why it's been adaptive. And then it links up with our personal histories. And that's why, you know, we might be done with the past, but the past ain't done with us. And it's just good to assume that and notice the one hasn't one foot in the past. So now, in about maybe 7 minutes, we're ready to talk about psychedelic integration. But how did that work for you? Is there anything else just before we bridge now to plant medicines? And
let's see. We certainly covered a lot of material. Is this people would when it's printed, this is all in your book, everything that you've been talking about? Yeah. Okay. Right. Cool. Well, we're getting a really epic download here.
Thank you. And I know it's a lot, and also it's just sort of like we learn through repetition. And so I say things in different ways, and I think it just sometimes just takes some time to dial these things in. But again, and now we're getting back to psychedelics. It's like, do you want to take the slow boat or do you want to take the fast rocket? And it's not like they're a magic bullet or a panacea, but as the research is strongly showing, as we know a lot from experience and thousands of years of indigenous ceremonial use, you know, they really, that's a whole other question here, because, you know, we can't even really do that justice. But in terms of what the research is showing about what this does in our brains, is they just provide this neuroplastic window, that where we can kind of, you know, one idea with MDMA that it promotes this earlier stage. It puts people back into this early stage of social learning when we were really influenced more by people around us and our relationships, and we can kind of learn new things in new ways. I like the metaphor of like the brain is hard, it's clay, and clay hardens, and psychedelics warm the clay, and then we can kind of shape it. The clay will harden again. And integration is often the work of shaping the clay. You know, so you have this big experience and you're like, you know, I feel like really connected with all and I'm love. And then you go back to like doing what you were doing before. And if that was, you know, like Netflix and chips and, you know, not really talking and being vulnerable and asking for what I need, nothing's really going to change. You know, so they're not magic bullets, they're not panaceas, but there are these tools when paired with personal growth processes that can provide a really, you know, and from my experiences, it's like, you know, at that time in the dark times, one of my solutions in coping with my trauma was became video games and cannabis. And I had this psilocybin ceremony, and it just like, I think these are medicines of grief and love. And, you know, to come full circle, this psilocybin took me to this place of the dark times and all the, you know, I got broken by my resistance to my grief, John, in this moment. And it was one of the most beautiful things that's ever happened to me. So that's why I say they're medicines of grief and love.
Yeah.
And what it looked like is like, I remember just thinking, you know, no matter what I do from here as a parent, I cannot change the harm that I've done in acting so dysregulated to, you know, and like some of my choices had consequences for my family, and I can't change that. And it broke me. No matter how good I am from here, I can't undo that. It broke me.
Yes.
I was just like, I cannot accept that I've done this. And it like,
Hmm.
what the fuck? How do I be with this? And like, I was just
Yeah.
sobbing.
Yeah.
And the medicine just showed me as I went through that grief that I didn't think I could ever forgive myself, but I could accept that I couldn't forgive myself and I could just grieve it for the rest of my life whenever it came up.
Hmm. Hmm.
Poof, huge life changing experience.
Hmm.
Because from that experience, and like even right now, I am grieving it.
Yeah.
Talking to you, talking publicly about this experience is my
Yeah.
integration.
Yes. Hmm.
So, but that experience that like we don't all, not all pain happens for a reason. There doesn't have to be a lesson or like a great outcome. It's just like sometimes we just get hurt and it
Hmm.
sucks. And, I see grief as like a portal, or sorry, acceptance is a portal to grief. Grief, when done with the requisite amount of self compassion, is the key to emotional digestion. Emotional digestion is the key to well being. And so, grieving, I think, is like brushing my teeth. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be brushing my teeth for as long as I'm alive. And I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure that grieving is going to be a part of my experience as long as I'm alive. Life is going to involve loss, and I'm here for it. I'm here for the
Hmm.
fullness of the human experience. I want to get to the end and think like, wow, I was really here for that.
Hmm.
And it hurt, and the hurt was beautiful, and the joy was ecstatic, and just the fullness of that. And I think we live in a grief phobic culture, and one of the things I
Yes.
want to do in this book is to help people change their relationship,
Hmm.
and learn and build what's called, like a temple of regret inside of us, you
Hmm.
know and go visit the temple of regret often and pray upon the altar of grief, but just
Hmm.
don't live there.
Hmm.
Don't take up residence again, like brewing, not stewing.
Hmm.
uh, and so because it's been transformative, and for me, I'm noticing just, yeah, I think I'll just pause because I guess want to see what's coming up for you, and I know
Hmm.
getting to the end, and I guess I also just noticing there's a lot more to be said about integration, but
Hmm.
maybe I'm trying to see if there's anything else I want to say there. There's a lot to be said about like phenomenology and what it means and how we show up with people and how we can show up with ourselves, but like I think just this sort of not knowing and being.
Hmm.
And let me fully pause because I'm trying to formulate a whole bunch of things, and I'm curious what's going on for you.
Yeah, I'm tuning into the topic of grief actually, as I wonder if you see it this way as well, but even in the heartfelt example of your lived experience through participating in a psilocybin ceremony, and just to make a distinction, this was like a sacredly held intentional space that was
Yeah.
a safe or brave enough space for you to be held in a way that that could happen. This wasn't a recreational party scene
Thank
or
you. In
low.
fact, I was
Yeah.
working with a therapist.
Yeah.
I was doing PTSD healing programs for first responders, and
Hmm.
someone pointed out to me, "Hey, dude, when you like are collapsing on the floor crying, that might be a trauma response." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like the trauma therapist is traumatized? Like, what do you mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
And I was working with a therapist at the time, and I was like, I'm going to go do some EMDR because I think this is what's been pointed out to me. And she was wise enough to say, hey, I think we should do a sacred like healing
Hmm.
ceremony and
Hmm.
shift our work to that. And that's
Hmm.
how that came out of. Luckily, I was in that container with that beautiful person
Hmm.
and other, yeah, guides and allies, and
Hmm.
it's supporting me through that. So yes, absolutely, that was where that came from.
Okay. Well, whether it's in the context of a psychotherapy counseling relationship or a psychotherapeutic relationship with the complement of allies such as plant medicines or psychedelic assisted therapy, it's just this piece around grief and like the reckoning and the recognition.
Yeah,
So back to your example of, oh, I can accept that I can't forgive myself, and like be in that acceptance and
yeah,
grieve the past and things that have been done and things you've regret.
yeah.
That seems transformative. that seems like something you said also, your observation of the culture is that we're in a bit of a grief phobic culture. Like we've lost the skill and capacity or ability or know-how to do this fundamentally important human, right to grieve, to move, to
Yeah.
so much to be said on that. I guess I tune into that when as it pertains to the experience of like insight, revelation, epiphany,
Yeah.
growth, transformation, healing.
Yeah.
That especially in the topics, much of it you spoke about around like the grief case and undigested pain. And here you are in a medicine journey, held, supported in a safe space, the complement of the psilocybin medicine in its own unique way, working to support what seemed to be the right time for you to, would you say like that was a moment of integrated digestion of some of this
It
undigested?
absolutely can I jump in there? Because you
Yeah.
remind me. So like I took up this, started using video games and cannabis to avoid that grief
Ah,
that I didn't even
uh-huh.
know I had. And that
Yeah.
was something that was kind of like had really driven that desire. And like
Mhm.
October 6th, 2018, or whenever it was,
Yeah.
I hadn't, I had been really using cannabis problematically and playing video games. It was like destroying my relationship. It's a
Mhm.
beautiful new relationship. And she gave me an ultimatum and was like, like, I love you and I can't keep doing this like this.
Mhm.
And I was completely broken. There's no light in my eyes that morning when I left. And I'm not trying to say magic bullet panacea. There was
Yeah.
years of therapy for me underneath this
Yeah.
of working. There was like years of integration after, but I came home with a light in my eyes that she saw. October 6th, 2018, I didn't touch my video game system from that day. That
Mhm.
behavior just went away.
Hmm.
And I believe it was the emotional digestion that had occurred from reaching that understanding that I could grieve this, and that was a
Hmm.
sort of form of acceptance. And it's
Mhm.
so I just wanted to throw that in there and answer the
Yeah.
question. It's sort of like it's wild, like I told you, I had this moment, and it was just like, yeah, it's hard being a parent. And, even this moment right now, today, and noticing this is like I am called to grieve the ongoing challenges, but like where that helps right now as you're talking, and I just realized is like I can show up for the painful moments and not turn against myself. Like
Hmm.
a mantra I want people to cultivate and wire in is there's nothing wrong with me for feeling bad. There's nothing wrong with me for feeling bad. There's nothing fucking wrong with me for feeling bad in this moment of
Hmm.
distress.
Mhm.
And and I started out working with people years ago, following this Buddhist idea of pain times suffering equals resistance. You know, curiosity about resistance became the way that I would help people move into acceptance. And the formula became, or what I worked with for years, helping people and started writing the book about was,
Mhm.
we want to try to move towards the idea that pain times acceptance equals freedom and
Hmm.
vitality.
Hmm.
In writing the book, I've come to revise the formula and recognize it's now pain times curiosity equals presence.
Hmm.
And this is where psychedelics help. This is where what our lives and our well-being depend on, the ability to show up when it hurts, the ability to notice this autopilot default wiring trying to pull our strings to get us to act in ways that served us at one time,
Yes.
to celebrate this as a moment of awakening or awareness that hurts, to recognize that we can meet our own needs for validation
Mhm.
and affirm ourselves. What you're looking for is inside of you.
Yeah.
you know where we started, like I wasn't trying to win you over, I was trying to win me over.
Hmm.
And like, John, just thank you for this conversation. I've enjoyed it. I've
Mhm.
had
Mhm.
sort of a mild psychedelic experience and awakening in this conversation from us
Yeah.
being so personal, and
Uh-huh.
integration is happening right
Yes.
now,
Mhm.
you know, and 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 it's just really this, it's beautiful because presence is really our where we're called to, I think, as a species, as a people,
Mhm.
this moment to really to be here with each other.
Mhm.
And like the be here now. It's beautiful words, but
Yeah.
how do we embody that? How do we help people that are stuck in this toxic culture? You
Mhm.
know, like the average person who might not be like breath work and ice baths and, you know, and meditation, and like just the average person. And that's
Mhm.
becoming a lot more of the average person. Fantastic, fantastic tools of
Yeah.
nervous system regulation. But for most people, they're really like, you know, stuck in this conditioned slumber
Mhm.
of our toxic culture. And so,
Mhm.
you know, I've wanted to just find a way to give people tools to awaken and to be present and to
Yeah.
experience and to recognize that, you know, when we show up for our grief, you know, we're also showing up for our capacity for joy. Um, you know, and
Mm.
and and that's it. That's the bargain
Mhm.
being here. You know,
Mhm.
you can't have one without the other. And if we numb our pain, we numb our capacity for joy.
Uh-huh.
Eventually life gets very narrow, and I want to
Yes.
live this, you know, I want that
Yeah.
experience. I want to be there for the full experience as much as I can.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful. Thank you. Makes me think of well, that's just that narrowing, but something about like as you say, tuning into and getting in touch with oneself in undigested pain or so forth, or unresolved grief, unprocessed trauma, unintegrated parts of self. But the part that I'm really interested in there that you spoke to is like we don't go in, don't care for any of those elements of our human experience. We also limit,
Yeah,
seems to be, as you share, like limit the experience of like positive affect and joy and um,
yeah,
gratitude and thankfulness or whatever, what have you. It makes me think of, or like curious
yeah,
about how, a lot of people in my work as well come and say like I'm, maybe a low-lying depression or I'm like languishing, but I want to be flourishing.
yeah,
Okay, well, what's getting in the way of the flourishing?
yeah. And it's like good news, bad news.
Yeah.
Like the you can experience that, and the path, you know, good news is everything you got is inside of you. The bad news is it's going to be painful on the journey home to yourself.
Yeah.
Good news about that is life is inherently bittersweet. And, you know, Susan Cain wrote that book, Bittersweet, which is just a wonderful book about um, tragic beauty in life.
Hmm.
And, um, you know, but and I'll write about this is kind of we're aiming for not grief or gratitude, but grief and gratitude,
Hmm.
grieving and grateful, to live in such a way that we can experience grief and gratitude in the same moment. Ah, that's where the presence is, you know. And it's like,
Yes.
we talk about like spiritual bypassing and like, you know, all these ideas, but it's just, for me, it's like not wallowing in the pain, but recognizing that grief and gratitude coexist in the same moment.
Yeah.
They can coexist. We're having a beautiful experience right now.
Hmm.
It's going to end.
Yes.
We won't have it again,
Yeah.
you know. Beautiful and
Hmm.
sad,
Hmm.
right? And like such is life in each moment. And there's an opportunity. And I don't think that's perfect that we can fully, like, it's not about, but like just working to be able to more fully show
Hmm.
up
Hmm.
for the bitter and the sweet is really good for us.
Yeah.
And again, with psychedelics being these tools of grief and love, they can just be powerful teachers in
Hmm.
helping people embody that
Yeah.
more and guiding the way
I
home.
have a check-in, excuse me, because it just feels as we start to wind down our conversation, it feels ethically important on the
Mhm.
topic of something you had said there, the development of self-reflective practices,
Yeah.
and talking here about psychedelics and plant medicines,
Yeah.
which has definitely become a bit of a hype in our culture, or
Love,
it's growing.
love
But
where
the
you're
the
going.
thing I want to speak to, though, or curious on your thoughts on the importance of, um, it's kind of an integrative question. There's a lot of hype around psychedelics, stirring
Yeah.
a lot of interesting ideas. The importance of setting matrix,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, this piece around pairing this with pairing psychedelic use with personal growth processes is something you had named.
Yeah.
And again, the ethical piece around, us being both therapists, but what's so important about having, integration plans set up or support
Oh,
networks or a
so good.
therapist?
So good. Sorry that I'm chomping at the bit. Okay.
Yeah, you
Okay.
got it. Go for it.
So this is part of the reason that I'm writing the book.
Yeah.
I think we talk about preparation, but like, what about preparation for preparation, pre-preparation? Like, we should
Mhm.
have longer runways. That is involves like I did addiction treatment residential programs. People come in 30, 60, 90 days, then they get thrown back into their lives. And many
Yeah.
people struggle. Why is that? Well, failures in aftercare, gradual titrate it, helping people reintegrate experiences into their
Mm.
lives. It's a big problem in the addiction treatment.
Mm.
Also like, yeah, and people can be in chaos going into treatment. And so like preparation, right? I think psychedelics might really offer that experience of a runway, but then there needs to be systems of preparation and aftercare built
Yeah.
into those. And I think it's where this has to go. And so now there's two bottlenecks, I think, at least two bottlenecks three bottlenecks: affordability, training enough therapists to meet demand, training
Yeah.
enough quality therapists to meet demand,
Yeah.
and the fact that we're going to have huge amount of psychedelically naive people who are going to
Yeah.
have their fucking minds blown
Yes.
and not know how to be in a non-ordinary state of consciousness.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem that's coming.
Yes.
And like, not everybody should do psychedelics. And
Yeah.
in fact, I'm more in the lines of like wanting to caution people, like, let's be careful and diligent and intentional here in your decision if I'm working with someone in preparation,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't unring the bell. Meaning, like, once that curtain is torn aside and they can be powerful, allies in helping us see in the dark. It's like this. We want to do better. A chapter in the book I call is called Tripping in the Dark, and it's about resistance. And it's this idea of like, if you have a goal and you want to do something, I want to stop drinking, I want to go to the gym, I want to be nicer to my family, I want to be more assertive, whatever.
Yeah.
Great. Aim at the goal. But we got to get our eyes on what you're tripping on in the dark. And likely what you're tripping if you want to achieve that, right? And we got to troubleshoot what you're tripping on in the dark. And so it's like, okay, curiosity is a great way to kind of, have this lantern in a dark room, being your unconscious, and to look around. Psychedelics are like sitting down in the room and turning on the light for a couple hours, and you get to look around.
Yeah.
Right? The light's going to get turned off again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, would you rather move around in the room knowing what's there and being able to like fumble around and guide yourself, right? Or not? But be careful about turning on the light. And some people just like, again, our culture is not one that promotes self-reflexivity, permission to grieve, the bittersweet, vulnerability, quite the opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
This toxic culture. And so people are just going to have their minds blown and not know how to integrate or put that together. So then I'm also kind of seeing this book as a guidebook of using curiosity and training people and getting them pre-prepared for preparation. We should have 8-week courses that people can take before doing a group psych. We will have that, and that's going to be a key part. We need to heal in community. What about a group psychedelic experience where people join a group of people and they learn these skills and tools in an interpersonal process way, seeing and being seen, non-psychedelically, just, group therapy. Yeah. And then having a group psychedelic experience, like, holy shit, and that will get real. And then having group integration, right? But like that preparation work on teaching people the skills. The last thing I'll just say about that, John, is, what I've seen is, again, okay, undigested pain, grief as a form of emotional digestion, temple of regret, altar of grief. That's where you want to go. Yet, without that requisite self-compassion, the emotional digestion at the altar of grief doesn't work.
Mm.
because people turn against themselves. So that's why this foundational, before I do any of that with people, it's
Mm-hmm.
training and being curious as a form of changing how you feel towards yourself before we go into the dark.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That practice on starting, and I should give that caveat. I don't want people to be curious about their most traumatic experiences. Like, it doesn't work. 8 out of 10 or above. This is not a tool for 8 out of 10 or above on the emotional thermometer. When we're out of our window of tolerance, we can't be curious
Mm.
in those moments. So please don't try. Start slow and go
Mm-hmm.
low. Start with
Mm-hmm.
mild sadness or not your deepest shame, but things that are sort of uncomfortable to look at. Be curious about that stuff, and then like work up from there
Mm-hmm.
and have a different set of tools. But that's kind of like how I see it, is curiosity can be a great foundational practice or a training in helping people learn how to be flexible and soft and self-compassionate in the throes of that unconscious, undigested river of pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Phew.
Did we just do it?
I think we might have approached the finish line.
Can I throw in one more piece? Because it's been circling around.
Go for it.
We
Yeah.
were talking about this. This is something I've been thinking about, like psychological well-being, wellness, right? My practice is called
Mm-hmm.
Wellness Evolved. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just sort of like, I don't know why I picked that term 15 years ago, but I do now. And what I think well-being is about is having our needs for closeness and distance balanced, more or less balanced, having an internal sense of I can lean the other way
Mm-hmm.
when I need closeness or distance. I have people I can open up to, like loneliness doesn't come from being alone. Loneliness comes from when we can't speak the truth of our heart to those who matter most. And
Mm-hmm.
so the philosopher Schopenhauer had this parable that we're like porcupines huddled together. Being human is like being porcupines huddled together in the dark. It's cold. So you see where this is going. We try to get warm. We come together and in trying to be close, we get pricked
Yeah.
away and we experience the cold. And it's
Ah,
a dance of like closeness and distance. I mean, the real moral of the story is don't be a prick.
yeah, I love
But
that.
Schopenhauer didn't live that, by the way. He was a total prick. But anyway,
Ah.
really tortured genius.
Uh,
Humanity a lot. But I think about this dance between closeness and distance, and everyone's got different needs in that regard.
mhm,
So it's not like we need to have 100 friends, but like, but also, do I have the ability to say I can set boundaries and create
mhm,
distance for myself? And do
mhm,
I have a sense that I think secure attachment is like also my needs matter as much as someone else's, equality of worth, no
mhm.
better, no worse. I'm
Yeah.
not inferior, I'm not superior, and
Yeah.
neither are others. We're all equal.
Mhm,
And just trying to work towards that and having this capacity for being able to balance our closeness and distance. And the thing that's
mhm,
been circling around is Gabor Mate's idea of attachment versus authenticity. So I'll talk about unconscious unworthiness in the book, and then conscious worthiness is the goal. One of the goal things in unconscious unworthiness, it's attachment or authenticity. And in childhood, what Gabor Mate
right.
says, these two fundamental needs, when the
Yeah.
need for attachment, when authenticity, being ourselves, asking for what we need,
Yeah.
reacting, acting out, this is who I am. When that threatens attachment, the people that I depend on care enough for me that I feel safe.
Yes.
Attachment trumps authenticity every time, he says.
Right. Yeah.
For me, that speaks to the dynamics between shame and loneliness and how the not good enough story and my shame protects me from the ultimate fear of the human being, which is being alone,
Mhm,
you know? And so there's a dance there with moving from unconscious unworthiness, attachment versus authenticity, to conscious worthiness, attachment and authenticity. Being who I am doesn't threaten my ability to feel safe with the people that
mhm. Yeah.
matter the most. And I think just psychedelics hold great potential and promise here for helping guide people back home versus
Mhm,
rediscovery of their self-worth. Self-worth
mhm,
doesn't go away. It gets obscured by clouds. Self-esteem goes up and down. Self-worth is immutable, unchangeable. It's
mhm,
always there. We don't need to do anything. We just need to clear the shit out of the way so we can see who we really are. And
mhm,
that's both personal and collective as a species. And so I just, again, thank you for this opportunity. And I just
Mhm.
thank everyone for listening
Yeah.
to this. And, again, we're so many crises we face as humanity. And I just really want to invite people to show up to their own pain, because
Mhm.
that's what we need as a collective.
Mhm.
More heart warriors, love warriors,
Mhm.
who see everything um, as an opportunity to respond from a place of love. And yeah, thanks again, man.
Mhm. Thank you. Is it worth a little pause for a moment to let that all sink in?
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I just want to
Mhm.
say, like, if if you find yourself ever in a challenging psychedelic experience, just remember to breathe out.
Yeah.
And slow. Exhale is the key to riding the waves of grief.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's all I got.
I want to add, and it's just this grief joy paradox too, maybe in
Mm.
closing, is like, and again, even just pausing here for a moment, but the paradox I'm tuning into is there's like a grief connected to all the times we didn't feel as though we were allowed to be joyful.
Uh, yeah.
This, we have to like let that go,
Oh,
or to say it another way as well, just more generally, is like we need to grieve who we've been in order to be who we are fully, and
that's that's it.
who we're
That's it.
becoming.
That's
Yeah.
it. And I don't want to keep opening things up, but that's it. And I
Yeah.
like, how do you help people grieve? How I help people grieve at the altar of grief, the temple of regret. My question is, what has this cost you? This pain and this wound, and how you protected yourself and even abandoned yourself. Let's now
Mhm.
take stock. Let's do an accounting
Yeah.
of the losses you've experienced as a result of this.
Yeah.
And that's a tool that really helps people digest what's
Yeah.
undigested, to grieve. And of course, doing it with the requisite amount of self-compassion is the key. And if you don't have that, just be curious about why you don't.
Yeah. I think this might be a helpful like closing, summarizing sort of point. Here you are writing the book, Curious as Fuck, Curious AF.
Yeah.
Something you had said in a previous conversation with myself and or in one of our trainings was that you as a therapist help to create the conditions for, say, I think at one point it was, I create the conditions for dialogue and exchange and reciprocity and like learning. And um,
Yeah.
it seems like this fundamental condition, excuse me, of curiosity is something that's so close to home and heart for you that you create and foster in
Yeah.
dialogues like this or
Oh, yeah.
with your clients.
Are you sure this is summarizing and closing? Because this is
I don't.
actually opening. And
Is it? I don't know.
no,
Well,
no,
we'll
I'm
have to
just
grieve it then.
I just want I just want to laugh at how many things we're gonna say are closing. And
Yeah.
but it is a really good one, because I just like, you know, I have no idea what people need in a
Mhm.
session. I used to go in with like ideas on what they needed,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and like sheets, and we're gonna like,
Yeah.
man, I had a client, was doing some like EA self experience, like just someone in the training program. Yeah, it was just
Yeah.
like just showing up and saying, I don't know what you need, and I
Mhm.
and I want to know, I want to understand, because I want
Mhm.
you to know, and I want to be a reflective mirror of curiosity about your story and the unfelt parts and what that means about what you need. And let's just like see what's coming up and like say, is that really so? You say you want to talk about this and this would be the best thing for you. Is that so?
Mhm.
What comes up for me is this. And then how is that for you? And let's be with that. And we find our way without knowing. And, now that's like the other thing about the unlearning, with this therapist wanting to be in charge and be in control and thinking, if we don't know, like, get the fuck out of the way as a psychedelic guy. It
Mm.
is not
Yeah.
about you knowing, it's about you being there and witnessing
Yes.
and being with the person in the mystery, and using your curiosity to just continue to point at things and open and
Mm.
reflect. And don't get ahead of the medicine, as they say.
Yeah.
um, yeah, yeah, just that all came out from what you were saying.
Mm. Hmm. Well, I'm leaving this conversation with an open heart and uh, digesting a lot of really potent, teachings. I see you as well as a teacher. You've been a teacher of mine, and a role model and a mentor. And so thank you for being here so much and
Yeah.
saying yes to life in all the ways that you do as a man, as a father, as a pioneer, a co-pioneer in this movement of cultural collective evolution that we're involved in, and being a bloody goddamn heart warrior that you are. What an honor to know you in this lifetime, Mike. Thank you so much for
Oh,
taking the time
brother, it's really
to be
sweet.
here.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I really can receive that. Thank you. And yeah, this was this idea of being a love warrior. I was trained in this discipleship with a wonderful guide that I worked with, chaplain, who took me to realize and called me in like savagely and with kindness and fierce
Mhm.
love, to say, like, you are doing your healing to help yourself. You want to help people so you'll feel better. And I was like, oh my God, she's right. And it took me out of the wounded healer idea,
Mhm.
like I know what my therapist origin story is. I know what it's like to be on the planet, look in the mirror, to be on the planet looking in the mirror and not want to be here. And I didn't want anyone to feel that way. And I operated from that place for years,
Mhm.
but I was trying to avoid me getting in touch with how that's a part of my story. And I did
Mhm.
feel that way.
Mhm.
And it cost me something. But now, in this, like, being present more of the time and where I am in my development process, it's so beautiful. And I just want everyone to have the opportunity to experience that.
Yeah.
And more and more in my integration is like, is this for me? Am I like staying on top of, like, is this my ego? Like, oh, you're
Mhm.
this therapist who thinks this way and da da da. Is this so you can feel good, or is this about service to the collective?
Mhm. Mhm.
What is it, Mike? Which is it going to be?
Yeah.
And I'm prone to slipping back into that ego based, this feels good to be useful thing. And so I'm like just working to build the capacity to be constantly diligent. And one of the ways I am is receiving that beautiful compliment you just shared about being a teacher and not
Yeah.
deflecting from it. And at the
Yeah.
same time saying, we're and inviting everyone to recognize we're all teachers and we're all students
Mhm.
in this process. And we can all be changed by encounters, and nobody's better than you, no matter how many degrees or experiences or books or whatever, you
Yeah.
know, or what title or role, and striving to have this like quality of worth, so that we can be open to offering our teachings and our
Mhm.
wisdom, and we
Yeah.
be open to receiving them from those who we might
Mhm.
be thinking were the ones doing the teaching. Like sometimes
Yeah.
in therapy, I'm like, who's actually getting the therapy here?
Ah, yeah.
But
Yeah.
like I got to be clear that I got one rule, which is just don't cry more than the client. If I'm crying
Ah.
more than the client, that might be a problem. I need to take to my own therapy.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
thank you for that beautiful
Mhm.
sharing, and I really receive it really well, and I've learned a lot from this, and really glad
Yeah.
we had this conversation, and I
Yeah.
hope it just serves the highest good of all that get
Mhm.
to get to listen to this.
For sure. Mike, do you want to share anything here around being found and,
Yeah,
anything
sure.
about the book or last little
Sure.
comments on that?
Yeah. So Wellness Evolved, counseling on Instagram, Curious AF, the book, Wellness Evolved on Instagram. Those are my accounts.
Mhm.
Um, I share a lot there about these ideas. I would love to hear from anyone who has questions about what I'm talking about. I hope the book's to be released in 2025. It's going to be a graphic novel. The artist Liddy Love is going to
Mhm.
be my lovely partner,
Beautiful.
who gave me a second chance at life. She's on Instagram at Liddy _love. She's going to be doing the art in the book. A picture is worth 1,000 words, so it's
Yeah.
just not without her. She's as much involved in this. And her art is just amazing and inspiring. And so wellnessevolved.ca is my website, where there's a link you can sign up for notifications about the release of the book. I want this to go far and wide. It's my gift, our gift, of love to the collective, and just, would love to hear from people about this. I think those are all the socials.
Beautiful. Mike Mathers, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time. It's precious time that we have. And look forward to connecting with you again soon. Might have to do this again, hey?
Thank you again.
All right. Okay.
Be well.
You too. Bye-bye.